setting up a presentation in the chambers. So we'll formally start in a minute or two's time. Thank you. November for 2025. So I would like to welcome members of the Budget Committee and our guest today, Dr. Roy Haverman from the Bureau of Economic Research at the University of Stellenbosch University. With us today, we've got Mr. Dustin Davids, our procedural officer. The proceedings for today will entail a presentation that Dr. Haverman will be giving to us on certain thoughts relating to the budget and economic trends and so forth. And the presentation that he has prepared is being emailed to each of you who are on the committee or on the online platform. And I think that will also be coming by WhatsApp. So you would also then be able to follow that presentation. Now, the idea of inviting Dr. Haverman was to provide the committee with some additional input in the whole aspect of thoughts around the budget and the economic and fiscal challenges that we as a country face and also as a province faces. And we look to try and time this in line with the medium-term budget policy statement that has just been released and the whole adjustment appropriation process that we will be following. So I think want to just give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm Leon van Wyk, the chair of the Budget Committee, and I'll then give each of the members within the chamber today an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll go onto the online platform before giving Dr. Haverman an opportunity to introduce himself. So over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emery Boyson, and I'm an alternate member of this committee.
I'm Thomas Walters. I'm standing in for Member Mbombo.
Masipa, I'm an alternate on this committee. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Benedicte van Minnen. I'm a member of this committee.
Thank you. And then we can go to the members on the online platform.
Morning, it's Dave Bryant, member of the committee.
Morning, Chair and colleagues. Basil Petrus.
Good morning, everyone.
It's Derek Wessels here, and I'm an alternate on this committee. Thanks.
Morning, everyone. Peter Johnson, alternate member of this committee.
I'm not hearing anybody else on the platform there. So I'm going to welcome you, Dr. Haverman. It's certainly a pleasure to have you with us here today. And I think perhaps if you just could introduce yourself a little bit to the committee as well, and then you're welcome to move into your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to all the members. As I said, this is quite curious. I used to sit in these benches being interrogated by the committee for about 3 years. I'm quite very nice to be back. I was previously head of the budget office in the province from about 2020 to 2023. Currently at the BER, and I'll explain a little bit what the BER does in a moment. I was at university with Honourable Walters many years ago. So it's very nice to see everybody and be back. Just in terms of who we are, I think most people know who we are. We are the oldest macroeconomic research institution in South Africa, 80 years old last year. We are, for many companies, a virtual in-house economics department. We have about 90 clients that use our services. And we see ourselves as the economist's economist. And we always say you are more than welcome to come to us if you want to spend a day in Stellenbosch. We have a very nice building and we offer lunch if you drive all the way through to us. So feel free to come and talk to us at any time. We have a very good relationship with the provincial government, also with the national government and with the presidency. And we see ourselves as, I think, I won't say this too loudly, but I think particularly in the current political setup, I think it's very useful to have sort of an independent research unit that can sort of be the economist's economist. We have just on 20 staff, and as I said, we had our 80th anniversary, and those are the sorts of things that we deliver on. I lead something called the Impumelelo Economic Growth Lab. It's the word for success, and we see our role as trying to develop policy-relevant research work, capacity building, and all in the interest of achieving economic success in South Africa. As you know, there is a structural reform agenda on the go in government. It's going very slowly. But I think certainly we all know that this is really one of the number one things that we have to deliver as a country, which is to get our economy to grow. And the BER feels very much that as a sort of independent team, we hope we are able to provide some ideas that come with no particular ideological or any particular bias, but really are about how do we just or collectively get the economy to grow. So, Chair, you know I'm an economist, so I can speak for as short or as long as you like. So I just want to get a sense of how long you'd like me to speak for, or if you would like to do it interactively, or how you feel we should go about it.
The normal way we do is allow you to present, and often these presentations are probably up to about 45 minutes.
Okay, perfect.
And then we can perhaps take questions thereafter and, just see how that flows from there. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That helps me a lot. Feel free to stop me if there's anything you particularly want to talk about at the time. But we can wait for questions at the end. That works very well for us. So I was asked to speak about an overview of economic growth trends, fiscal constraints, and sectoral priorities affecting the 2026-27 Division of Revenue Act. I think going into the process, obviously next year, we obviously just had the MTBPS, and I'll talk a little bit about what came out there. And then obviously the main budget is coming up in February, we hope, not again in March or in April and May. But obviously preparing now and at a provincial level, preparing for mandating and the whole process going forward. Then I'll also identify some economic employment sectors that could inform the Budget Committee's recommendations into the Division of Revenue national budgetary process. I just want to pause for a moment and talk a little bit about the longer term view. This is a sort of a contextualization of where we are as an economy. Essentially, growth has collapsed. And it's interesting because growth has collapsed from very strong economic growth. We reached just over 6% in the 2005-2006 period, but on average, in the 2000s, we experienced economic growth of 3.6%. Between 2015 and 2019, and that's the period before COVID, we only had economic growth of 1%, one of the slowest 5 years periods in the history of recorded economic growth overall. I've done a paper taking back economic growth to 1740, and it is actually by long run historical standards one of the worst periods we've ever experienced as a country, particularly in GDP per capita terms. We've had very slow periods, particularly in the 90s and in the 80s, but then we had this really strong period from about 1994 onwards when the economy opened up and we had a collection of fantastic economic policies that drove economic growth. And then obviously in the period from about 2010 onwards, economic growth declined. We've seen GDP growth collapse. There is this argument often made that it's the post-2008 GFC argument, but that doesn't really hold up. It really was. It's very important to highlight that our growth has been weak in comparison to other similar countries like us, and those are often classified as upper middle income countries. The average upper middle income country was poorer in South Africa than in 2009, so that's just after the crisis, but is now substantially richer. So there are lots of lines on that graph, and it's quite small if you are watching us. But this line over here is South Africa, the red line, and you see that it actually doesn't go anywhere. It's quite flat and actually declines. This line is China, definitely the winner of the past decade. It was poorer than us in 2009. It is now substantially richer than us on average. And other countries like Colombia, which is a really interesting comparator to us, their per capita income was the same as ours in 2010. And you can see there's the gap now between Colombia and South Africa. So that really suggests that, we really need to do something. And I think also what it suggests is that there are other countries out there that have managed to do it, and there's no reason why we can't learn from them and try and do something about our economic growth. There's this thing called potential growth, which is not the fastest you can achieve, but sort of the fastest you can drive your economy without things going wrong. So the governor of the Reserve Bank the other day gave a very good explanation of it. He said it's like the speed limit on the highway, and you can go faster than the speed limit, but something will go wrong. And that's also a very good analogy because the speed at which you can drive really depends very crucially on the road that you're on. If you are on a beautiful highway with no potholes, you can drive very fast. If you're on a dusty road in the middle of nowhere, you can drive very slowly. So the speed that the economy can drive on depends very much on the road that you're on. And if you're in Germany in the Autobahn, you can drive as fast as you like. Particularly if you're in a nice German car, and that also suggests, that actually one can achieve this incredible economic growth if you have the right framework and the guardrails and the right sets of things going for you. There are various ways of doing it. I won't go into details, but essentially all the estimates, so that our own estimates from the BER, from the OECD, and from the South African Reserve Bank suggest that per capita potential growth fell to actually just on zero just before COVID. COVID creates a whole bunch of things, and I'll talk to those in a moment about the data. But essentially, most estimates are now that the economy can barely scrape about 1% economic growth in 2025. Now, that is not nearly enough to deal with any of the issues that we obviously have to deal with. And it is historically incredibly weak for ourselves. So we even had potential growth of 2% in 2010. And if you do a breakdown into why growth has been so weak, you can do something called a Solow decomposition. And this comes from Robert Solow, who won the Nobel Prize in economics for this model, where he basically says that growth can be broken up into three components: capital, labor, and total factor productivity growth. And that gives you a good sense of what are the things that are actually driving growth. And if you have a look at this great period of growth that we experienced after the fall of apartheid from about 1994 to 2000, you will see that that was actually a big expansion of total factor productivity. That was partly as we integrated into the rest of the world and the economy became more productive. But from about 2024 onwards, those are the gray bars, the economy started to significantly add jobs. Now, it wasn't enough at the time. It was, I think, about 1 million or 2 million jobs. And so I wish we had created more jobs in that period, but we did create jobs. And I think we have a graph later that I can show you that shows that as the economy started to grow, particularly in that period, jobs followed quite naturally. And then the global financial crisis came. And what was really interesting about that, of course, is that the contribution of TFP collapsed. So we became far less productive as an economy. And I'll explain in a moment why. And we also had some investment, but that was very unproductive investment. And this is basically just saying the same thing that I've said here, is that actually during the strong periods of growth, we had very strong productivity growth, and then that was weaker later on. If there's one graph, I think that summarizes the 2010 to 2020 period very well, in my opinion, is this graph of capital stock, which is the amount of capital that's invested, versus the productivity of that capital stock. I call this the state capture graph because I think it comes out very nicely in terms of what happened. You can see there the blue line, the top line, talks about electricity, the amount of investment in electricity or the capital stock of electricity, and we more than doubled the capital stock in electricity from 2010 to 2020. But if you look at the right-hand side, you see that the productivity of the electricity sector fell spectacularly from about, if you use index base 100 to 25 in 2025. Essentially what that was, it basically shows you this huge expansion of spending into Medupi and Kusile, and we didn't get anything out of it. And this has quite interesting long-term implications for the economy because redirecting resources in this direction was incredibly expensive, and not only that, really left us in a far worse situation than before. There were some sectors that saw productivity increases, but very, very small, and particularly small in comparative situation. So that kind of gives you like an overall context of where the economy is as a whole. I've got a lot of slides on here. I'm going to run through them quite quickly and maybe just stop on some of them that are interesting. The members can read the whole pack and you can go through it in detail. What I'm going to talk about now is not the long run structural situation, but just dig into, I guess, more cyclical factors, particularly the global situation, and then followed on by the domestic situation. Okay, so in summary, after a long initial downward adjustments, global forecasts are revised up. The US shutdown was resolved. At one stage, there was a very significant impact on growth, and that seems to have been given a little bit of growth uptick again. We haven't seen tariff-induced inflation in the US yet. We think that's about to come. Eurozone inflation seems to be under control, and while China nears deflation. If you have a look at the overall monetary policy settings, it seems that the ECB is basically done with all its cuts. The US Fed has restarted cuts, although not as fast as Trump would want. But the US economy still seems a little bit on the weak side, so more cuts may come. The dollar remains very weak, and that has obviously supported the rand. I'll talk about that later. But markets have recovered from what Trump called the Liberation Day issues. Geopolitics, obviously, a big story has been Gaza. This slide is now, unfortunately, a week or too old. So the Gaza ceasefire hasn't held, but the Russia-Ukraine war continues with inconsistent messaging from the US. Fiscal, big ramp-ups in defense spending in Europe, and the one big beautiful bill in the US. It's quite good. And then on trade, US tariffs on everything but the kitchen sink. But a year-long truce with China is welcome. So the geopolitics, I mean, there are a lot of different impacts on this. Essentially, what the impact has been an incredible increase from our perspective in commodity prices, which has obviously been very good for us, for our stock exchange, and also for fiscal revenue. And I'll talk to that about it in a bit of a moment. But of course, as always, the unpredictability of Trump is always a story. If you look at the latest forecast from the IMF, this is from October, essentially expecting advanced economies to be the world growth, if you look at the top line there, to be a little bit slower than it has been for the past few years, and the US easing from 2.9 and 2.8% in 2024 all the way down to 2.1% in 2026. Emerging markets are also declining in growth from 5.2 to 4.2, and India down to 6.2. Basically, just making the point that the global situation is a little bit worse than it was before. And most of the reasons is actually because although the tariffs, I'll talk to that in a moment, do affect us, particularly in the Western Cape, because they're levied in agriculture, but we're not as affected as many other countries because actually our main export components are actually minerals, which are exempt, but they will affect other countries. So big export markets like Germany, we expect will be affected. So we'll be affected retrospectively. Just quickly on, I think I've spoken about all these things in terms of that. That's kind of the global situation. Just turning to South African exchange rate situation. As I said, the global forces help explain why the rand is strong right now. Dollar weakness, strong commodities, and a risk-on environment. What that means is that people are quite keen on emerging markets because they have higher yields, and that there's a lot of flowing into emerging markets at the moment. It's a view that emerging markets are going to have very good few years, and that supports commodity exporters like the rand. And then the rand moves closely with the dollar, global risk appetite in terms of trade and inflows. We're tracking our commodity peers benefiting from a weaker dollar, lower volatility, improved trade balance, and US inflation is in line, but keep Fed's cuts on track. Relative growth and interest rate outlook is supportive. It's basically a whole bunch of confluence of factors that are actually keeping the rand quite strong. That's very good for keeping inflation down because we obviously import a reasonable amount, particularly of consumer goods. And I have been wondering to what extent all these Black Friday specials are actually just a case of the fact that retailers are pushing on the stronger exchange rates to us. But also at the same time, it's also been very good from a fiscal perspective. So as you saw, the Treasury has got just on 20 billion more in revenue this year than they had expected at the time of the budget. We think that rand strength will probably continue for a little bit longer. The new inflation target is very good for competitiveness. It's very good for credibility. There has been quite a lot of positive sentiment towards South Africa at the moment. So things are looking up right now. We have our new business confidence index coming out next week. So we're looking forward to seeing what that's going to say. But the ratings upgrade by S&P is obviously very welcome also. Inflation, essentially, that we've had also good, it's like a whole bunch of good news at the moment, which is really nice. Good harvests have fed through to prices. Meat prices remain up, but it seems as though food inflation will soften in the coming months. Then the other bigger thing, of course, is Eskom's tariff hike, which will increase electricity prices quite significantly. And on the positive side, however, of course, is because of the stronger exchange rate and actually overall lower oil prices, that'll possibly be quite positive from that perspective. And transport is quite important. And so really all of this is feeding through to actually quite a nice environment for the Reserve Bank from an inflation perspective. The inflation has fallen a little bit faster than they expected, plus the Treasury has confirmed their inflation forecast of 3% with a tolerance band of 1% on either side. And that basically has allowed the bank to cut interest rates. And of course, I think I've spoken about the new target. But interesting enough, the Treasury still expects to hit its fiscal targets over the next 3 years. It says it will stabilize the debt to GDP ratio this year. That's hopeful, probably will. It has some issues, and I'll come to that in a moment, in the second and the third year. And that's where it is at the moment. So the Treasury had originally projected that the debt to GDP ratio that's the gold line, would rise a little bit in 2025-26. Unfortunately, the increase now that they project is a bit more. There's some very interesting reasons for that. One of them is actually that the way you calculate debt to GDP is obviously debt divided by GDP. And when inflation comes down, nominal GDP is also down a little bit. So there's a bit of a technical impact of lower inflation on the overall debt to GDP number. That's not the end of the world. That is just one of those things. That said, they've also managed to revise down nominal expenditure growth. And I'll come to a little bit in a moment what that means for the province. From 5.4% in May to 3.6% now over the medium term, with the fastest growing item being capital expenditure. There is also a promise to improve the efficiency of public spending, which I also talked about the provincial implications of that. And then I've also said that, we see that low inflation target will bring forward interest rate cuts. We famously were not expecting them to cut interest rates in November. And then a week before, then the target changed, the latest inflation numbers came in, and we actually changed our call on the Friday before the meeting next week. Wednesday, we said they would cut, and then they did cut. But that was very much in the rest of the market. We kind of changed their mind at the last minute. And then we think that they're still waiting for all the cuts to come through. We expect a total cut-in cycle of about 125 to 150 basis points. We are waiting to see the 2025 Q4 inflation expectation survey, because that'll really say whether or not people are believing this change in the target. We obviously produce the expectations survey. The really frustrating thing about that is that the economics team is not allowed to see it until the moment it comes out. So only the survey team is allowed to see it. So, and then they're not allowed to talk to us. So we're also waiting with bated breath for the survey that we ourselves collect, and the data is somewhere in the building, but we're not able to see it. But that'll be very important for guiding where the bank thinks interest rates are going to go for a while. And then I've spoken about that, so I won't just. Okay, so that all sounds quite positive. And things are sounding quite positive, but we actually haven't seen economic growth yet. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Just to go through the headlines again for what we think from a domestic perspective. Inflation has been below 3% for quite an extended period, and can we achieve and maintain this lower target? I think the 3% plus a tolerance band helps quite a bit. the bank has been very clear that lower inflation begets lower interest rates. I like how they use this biblical term of begetting lower interest rates, because in some ways it is both. It is actually just a function of mathematics, that the lower inflation rate you get, the lower the interest rate is. And they have also cut at the same time, so that's very good. Fiscal policy, there was a very positive response to the M2PS, in part because expenditure was revised down, but there is still a lot to be done. The Rand continues to be a bit strong. Financial assets are performing very well. The stock market's doing very well. Medium-term growth prospects are thus a little bit better. But really what the big story is, of course, is the political environment. And we do a lot of surveys on what business is worried about. And political environment continues to be a big concern for them. And of course, Helen Zille is gunning for Mayor of Johannesburg, and it'll be very interesting to see what the impact of that is. And then business confidence ticked down in Q3, but we'll see what happens in Q4. So the really interesting thing is that the political headlines are messy as always, but interesting enough, it doesn't really matter increasingly because the GNU has really coalesced around Operation Vulindlela. And that means that the economic reform agenda will continue, and I think that's very good and very important. It means that no matter what really happens at the political level, we can continue to drive a growth agenda overall, which I think is strongly supported by the whole GNU. We have just announced the appointment of a new political analyst. So I wish she was here today, but she's only joining us on the 1st of June, and that's 1st of January. That's Natasha Marion. And so she will increasingly be doing our political analysis. But from what we can see and what we've been talking to about, there's obviously a lot of concern about what coalition dynamics might take place at the local government elections. But obviously, if Johannesburg can turn around, there's a lot of positive things that can happen there. Then turning more to the GDP numbers, GDP has been very, overall been sort of flat, but if you dig into it, actually the star of the show has been the consumer. There have been quite very few positive things happening for the consumer. One of them is two-part retirement spending. The other one is the SRD grant. And exports have been doing okay. The problem is that investment has been very, very weak. And so it has been a clear underperformer over a while. And investment really follows confidence. So trying to understand how we create more investment, I think, is very important. And this really is a outcome of low business confidence. And there I show that all areas of investment have been very weak. On the positive side, the reforms have led to substantial expansion of electricity supply, which of course have been very positive for growth. And there's been this substantial improvement in Eskom operational improvement, where we obviously haven't had load shedding for quite a while, and that's in part because maintenance has improved. And there we just go into the detail there, just highlighting the strong consumer spending numbers, and although the consumer confidence index is a bit weak. Slowly but surely, the lower interest rates are helping the consumer, so that's sort of where we think things are getting better. Debt service costs are slowly coming down, of course. Real net wealth of households, because a lot of the upper income households have got share portfolios, has gone up very well. So you've got this positive effect on the particularly upper end of the consumer of lower interest rates and lower repayments, and then improving it in real wealth. And for the first time, we're actually seeing positive, in inflation-adjusted terms, positive growth in lending. One of the most interesting things that, well, I don't think it's interesting. I'm looking for a new car at the moment, so I'm finding this very interesting. But the most interesting is actually the new vehicle dealer confidence is kind of bouncing through the roof at the moment in long-term terms, because many of our motor vehicle dealers sell all types of cars, both imported and domestically produced cars, and car sales have been doing quite well on the back of actually new interests like Chinese cars, which has also brought down costs quite significantly. And lending has gone up. But we still see that although we had a very good 2025 year, this might set to slow over a while. I think I've spoken about the stock exchange and grant increases that have helped the thing. This is just a forecast of all the different components of consumer spending. I won't go into that in detail. I think, Chair, you spoke to about this earlier, because it is obviously a big issue at the moment and a very big issue for the province. Having, for my sins, had to be part of preparing the provincial budget, the gambling is a very big component of the provincial budget. Of course, it's a really interesting thing. So it does seem to us, and this is definitely from all the Stats SA information, is that sports betting seems to be coming at the expense of other forms of recreation and entertainment spending. So I'm sure, as you know, what's really happened in the betting world in the gambling world is that sports betting is kind of taken over. You can now just bet on your phone and online, and it's very easy to do gambling, whereas in the past it was much more complex because you had to literally go to the casino. But the interesting thing is that actually, if you do the breakdown at the bottom there as gambling as a percentage of recreation and cultural spending, so Stats SA collects spending on what it calls recreation and culture, it does seem as though people are choosing to gamble rather than do other things like go to restaurants or go out or whatever. And that has really negative effects, obviously, on the economy because it's just money that basically goes into the sky or goes onto your phone or to a sports betting company and doesn't necessarily go to restaurants. So that has this interesting drag on the economy. And that's on the right-hand side where recreation and culture is just the opposite thing, as a percentage of consumer spending that's falling. We've been thinking a little bit about this, as I said, just come at the expense. Maybe there's some positive things. Maybe advertising revenue. I recently flew up to KZN to do a presentation. I landed at King Shaka, and it was quite extraordinary. I walked into King Shaka Airport, and I felt like I'd walked into a Hollywood Bets universe because the whole airport was just purple and was this incredible amount of advertising. So maybe there's some advertising revenue, but what happens to these profits? Are these South African profits or foreign profits? It's very difficult also to quantify the societal impact of this. Previously, gambling was often thought of being a bad thing because people would go to casinos and might spend a lot of time at casinos and drink a lot and spend all day there and lose all their money. Now it's really hard to actually see what people are up to. If they're on their phones and gambling all the time, is it that they're just bored? But we do know that they're spending a lot of money on it. It's not clear they're getting any money back, because obviously I think we would all be gamblers if we got money back. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting things that's coming out. And we put out a column a little while ago highlighting this issue. And obviously the National Treasury has just recently published a paper proposing a additional gambling tax, national gambling tax. But I'm sure, as this committee knows very well, the big gap, of course, is that we don't have really appropriate legislation for online gambling. So we kind of now stuck in this universe where it's actually there was quite a scathing article, I think it was in News 24 yesterday, highlighting that the Treasury can't expect to raise taxes on gambling because actually it's illicit gambling. So it's hard to to tax something that's illegal, which is obviously true. Although often, in the old days, the story used to go that you could you could tax Al Capone, but you couldn't arrest him. So they end up arresting him for tax evasion, not for killing people. But there are these big gaps in the legislation, and I really think we're seeing the consequence of that at the moment. And then the final thing that I think a lot of people ask us is about tariffs. So the interesting thing is that this is quite small at the top there. Obviously, agricultural tariffs have hit us quite hard. But it's important to realize that that it's also something you must think about from a relative perspective. So we produce a set of agricultural goods. Spain produces similar agricultural goods in some ways. Certain things only we do. Certain things only, for example, some other countries do, and certain things that United States doesn't do at all. Famously, the United States can't grow a banana, which I find fascinating. Or they can grow bananas, but only in a very small belt somewhere, I think in Louisiana or something. But now they've levied a tariff on bananas. They've levied tariffs on all bananas from wherever they come. And so relatively, we're not actually harmed by this relatively, but it will have big implications on consumer spending. That said, the one area and similarly on cars. So that's a bit different because the US does produce significant car manufacturers. So now the cars that are produced here will be more expensive. However, the tariffs on mining goods, which is the top there and very small, PGMs, manganese, coal, gold, chromium, bullion, tantalum, vanadium, etc., are all exempted, and those are our largest export items. So overall, we think there are modest effects, but the sectoral impacts will be quite difficult. The more serious thing is, of course, the diplomatic relationship between South Africa and the United States remains quite strained. Obviously, it has been strained for a while, and obviously, apart from the G20, has been quite constrained. And there we go into a little bit of detail. This was a very nice picture in the Business Day using a report from the Bureau for Agricultural Research. We have a very close relationship. We actually share offices with them, and just highlighting, exactly where all the income comes, and just highlighting that actually our export market to the US is actually relatively small. Okay, so I think I'm on track for 45 minutes. I just want to quickly finish with our forecast, our baseline forecast. I think I've spoken about this. Our baseline forecast is for growth of 1.7%. So we are expecting the economy to recover. Now, 1.3% is very slow, but it is about double the speed of last year, or this year that we're about to finish. So it's double the speed of last year. And so we're actually having a much better 2025 than we had last year, which is quite good. We expect growth to rise to about 1.7% in 2027, so a slow recovery from where we are. National Treasury has got 2% in their forecast. The Reserve Bank is, I think, this closer to us, but essentially a recovery. From a fiscal perspective, we expect bond yields to start continually coming down in nominal terms, which is very good for the fiscal position. And as we said, we expect interest rates to start coming down. It's just a case of when, not if. And so, the overall prime overdraft rate will probably come down to about 9%. And that's because we expect the rand to remain relatively strong at about 17 and consumer prices to start coming down. So 1.7% growth isn't like particularly fast. We still need to do more stuff, but it's definitely quicker than it was before. And then you want me to speak a little bit about the Provincial Division of Revenue. Shall I pause now and then?
Yes, I think if you could,
Okay.
because I think part of our big conundrum going forward is the fact that the slice that comes to provinces is relatively small, and the needs are increasing a lot faster. We've got population influx that's coming into the provinces, and I think particularly in the social services, the education, the health, social development area, there's an increasing need, and the question is, where do we get that additional level of funding?
Absolutely. So when I'm glad I'm no longer at the Provincial Treasury, but it's very serious. Yeah, I think it's very serious. So there I've got the overall division of revenue for the next 3 years, well, this year and the next 3 years. Interesting enough, if you think about inflation target about 3%, then growth in spending for the Western Cape is about 3.9%. That's faster than the inflation target. But inflation will probably be around 3.5%. So the province will get roughly inflation growth in its allocations. But the provincial, I don't have the graph here, but the provincial, partly because the numbers are difficult to get, because the stats say, but I think by all accounts, the province's population is growing faster than the rest of the country. And that's obviously, as we all know, significant migration. And so there will be significant increased demands for health education infrastructure. I have 4 ideas to think about. The first is to grow the overall amount of spending. So if we can get the economy to grow faster, then there will be more money available to allocate to provinces. So there, we've done a lot of work on what we call the road to 3%. So what could be done to get us to 3%? We think we can squeeze out 2.8%, maybe 3%, if the reforms that the government has laid out are implemented. So that would be the first thing. And I think certainly for the province to push very hard on getting reforms implemented, particularly because many of these reforms are very important for the provincial economy. The most significant one there is ports and rail. The provincial economy is very much held back by the fact that Cape Town port is not in a great state at all. There has been some progress, but it's still doing very poorly. On the other hand, water infrastructure in the province is touch wood, still quite good, partly because the metro and the other big municipalities have spent a lot of money on water infrastructure, whereas this hasn't happened in the rest of the country. And then obviously electricity is quite important. But I think from a provincial perspective, ports and rail is quite important. Yeah, I've often wondered to what extent the province could actually help. One thing to work out is to what extent can the province actually, from a provincial perspective, help improve Cape Town port? Can the province allocate money to the port somehow, or can the province think about improving Saldanha? The Saldanha SEZ is part of the provincial budget. But if we can get not necessarily the SEZ to work better, but actually the port at Saldanha to work better, that would make quite a big difference. The things to think about. Then growing the provincial equitable share. So this really goes to what I've done there is I've done the allocation by national departments, provincial and local government. And essentially what the Treasury has said is that they're not really going to move the relative allocation much over the next 3 or 4 years. Now, you could argue that that's not really appropriate because when you talk about service delivery, the service delivery is executed primarily by provinces and by local government. what the national government does is defense, social grants are the big spending items, and the third one is policing. So policing, I think, is quite important, but there are questions about whether these big other spending items are really helping. Should we be directing money to those big spending items, or should we rather be directing money to health and education, which is a provincial function? And you could do really big cost-cutting exercises at the national level. We've done a big piece of work on CETA reform, highlighting the fact that there is anywhere between 20 and 30 billion, probably about 20 billion per year that could be unlocked from a significant CETA reform program. That 20 billion could, for example, be allocated to provinces or to local government. Then the other one, of course, is state-owned enterprises. So we have had years where Eskom, for example, has been allocated, 50, 60 billion in a year. When I was in the province, I used to do all the calculations about the impact on, what 50 billion, is that a large number or a small number? To give you a sense of the size of that, a 1 percentage point increase in VAT would get us about 12.5 billion. So it's like 3 times a 3 percentage point increase in VAT. Or 50 billion on the provincial equitable share if you allocated it amongst the 9 provinces. Just to make the mathematics easy, let's assume there are 10 provinces. But anyway, if you had 50 billion, you divide up equally amongst everyone, that's 5 billion, just over 5 billion per province each. CETA reform, if you take the 26 billion and divide it up, you're talking also, quite a few billion. On a budget on the provincial budget of about 86 billion, I think, this fiscal year, that's actually quite a lot of money. So it's interesting because if you move money from national to provinces, you actually get quite big implications. But that does require big decisions to be made nationally. Then, obviously, growing the province is very important. I have long been a believer that education makes a big difference for growth. I don't think that's incredibly controversial. This is from a paper that was also carried in the Business Day, did a really nice graphic of it on the impact of education on growth. And basically that line just shows that the higher your education level, the faster you grow. South Africa's education performance is right here at the bottom. And our growth is also right here at the bottom. So surprise, surprise. On the right-hand side, it just shows you the impact of having education for an ordinary person. If you're a graduate, you get about 40%. Your returns, so the amount of money you receive, your income is actually 40% higher than someone without. Which actually probably on the low side if you think about it. But anyway, it's quite significant. And the unemployment rate amongst graduates is 9%, whereas those amongst people with just matric is 33%, and those with less than a matric is 39%. The province is in charge of education. Obviously, provinces do quite well in education, but just thinking about how you actually derive even better education levels in the province will make the province grow faster. And that also has long-term implications. Not only is the province growing faster, but then also the province gets more money from national, because growth is a portion of the story when it comes to that. So we have some ideas. This comes from my friends at Stellenbosch University, not from us, from an outfit called RECEP, the Research for Socioeconomic Policy, led by Sir Fast van der Berg. But some ideas about how you get, for example, and I know Honourable Mania is very keen on this, is getting top students into top schools. The province has excellent government schools. And there are some ideas about how you actually get more, and they actually are doing this through a variety of programs, but you can quite quickly improve learning outcomes potentially by that. The other one is actually also to increase the size of top performing schools. This is just an example. I'm quite a big fan of this. I famously quite controversially, am in favor of ways of getting very, very competent students into top schools. Makes a huge difference both for them, but also for the system, because you need to have a way of streaming really top students in schools. And these are just a bunch of examples of people that went to top schools, all government schools, and have been quite successful in their lives. Then obviously, I think, Chair, you will know, this is very important, which is to improve the governance of municipalities. No, I mean, it's a very nice graph for the province. The province spends per capita more overall, spends more per capita at a municipal level than any other province. And if you break it down into what provincial municipalities spend the money on, they spend substantially more on per capita spending, on capital expenditure, so on investment spending than the other provinces. So I'm not quite sure if we should say you should do more of this, because the province is doing very well in this area already, but overall, I think this is quite a good story, but I think it goes to the heart of like making sure that happens. You can do some really cool statistics about like the share of we had some interesting statistics the other day. Johannesburg's population, so that's what SASSA says the population, and the Cape Town population is about the same, because the city of Johannesburg is actually quite a small municipal area, relatively speaking, to the whole of Gauteng. But the city spends, I think, like 20% more, 30% more in infrastructure than the city of Johannesburg does. And land area-wise, actually, the city of Cape Town is substantially larger than the city of Johannesburg. So statistics like that are quite interesting. But those have very big implications for growth, as we can see. So I'm not really... and these are just some recommendations we had a paper out on, like how you can actually improve the governance of municipalities. Appoint more engineering and finance officials, reduce political interference, accelerate training services reforms, improve the framework for municipal interventions. I know there's a whole program of work in the province on this. And then more bang for the buck. So actually just, you know, there have been provincial expenditure reviews to benchmark performance. There's some recent research saying that actually there is more ways that you can improve efficiency of spending. For example, teachers can be better optimized. I suspect similar things potentially in hospitals. But, you know, this actually, I think, requires quite a lot of thinking. The use of public-private partnerships for new ways of spending money on infrastructure. I know the provincial treasury has done a lot of work on this and is thinking about blended finance. And then I think, you know, back to the gambling point, you know, how do you think about own revenue enhancements and how do you use own revenue? So gambling is really interesting. The argument was always that one must be careful not to increase the gambling tax by more than the other provinces. And the reason is because particularly this online gambling stuff, very easy for a operator to go pick up sticks and go, no, I'm no longer going to pay my taxes in Western Cape. I'm now going to pay my taxes in Mpumalanga, which is pretty much what's happened. But we're still relatively good at we've done quite well in getting that gambling revenue. But, you know, one can think about carefully. It's a very complex area because also the social consequences aren't great. Motor vehicle license fees, there's a lot of it thinking about how to use those better for supporting infrastructure spending. Also a bit difficult. The one I haven't put up because I know it's very controversial, but I may as well just mention it, is obviously of additional fuel levy on top of the existing fuel levy. Interesting enough, the Bureau of Economic Research did some work on that for the province about 20 years ago. But these are ways that one can think about actually how do you find more money over the long term. Great. I think that's my conclusion. The world is a complex, difficult place. Western Cape continues to do relatively well, and then growth for jobs will enhance these opportunities. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. You've certainly given us a fair amount to think about. And I mean, when you were talking about gambling, my mind just went back to the days of living in Johannesburg And for that bit of excitement, he would go to Sun City and
Yes.
take the massive drive out to Sun City and go and spend whatever money that you had there. Even if you didn't gamble, it probably cost you a fair packet in doing it. And today, for certain weekends of the year, at least you can now sit in front of your TV set and watch a certain rugby side sort of pummel other rugby sides around the world. And maybe not gambling. I haven't thought of that, the betting bit, but that's obviously one aspect. But while just giving some colleagues a chance to think of what questions they may have, the one question that I've been puzzling about is looking at the Western Cape economy's growth and what we have had, and just looking at the circumstances that the Western Cape has had over the last few years. We've had an influx of population, and often wealthier people coming in from other provinces into the province. We've, in a way, we think we've been a little bit quicker on dealing with renewable energy and having that level of protection. Our agriculture is obviously pushed quite hard, and we're seeing a lot of international tourism coming in. Those being examples there. And then you say to yourself, and with having a target that you want to become a trillion rand economy by 2035, should we perhaps have seen greater traction in terms of the growth that we're already showing? Or on the other side, is the economy in fact so bad nationally that we are doing relatively well compared to that? And the question then is, how do you in fact move that growth level up a little bit faster? And what do we need to do in terms of our policy making here in the Western Cape to try and move quicker? And certainly you have indicated quite a few areas here that where one can have an element of thought. So those were just my type of questions that I have. I'm not sure on questions. I think Member Masipa, I know his hand. I'm just trying to see if he's there. He is online. So I think you can go forward. Whoever else, please just show your indication. Member Walters. And then Member Nkondlo. So we'll take those three questions then, Masipa, Walters, and Nkondlo. Okay, Member Masipa doesn't seem to have going ahead, so I think go ahead, Member Walters.
Yeah, perhaps Professor Haberman shouldn't have mentioned we went to university together. He might have destroyed his credibility in the process. I'm particularly interested in the energy component. You use the analogy of you're on a highway and you can't go, beyond a certain speed, and it becomes wobbly, and depends on I think it's a lovely analogy. One part of the highway, of course, is the cost of energy. I might be wrong, you might know, but I understand relative in real terms, the cost of energy increased in South Africa something like 5-fold in the last, since the 80s or something. But that is a constraint on growth. If you have any other wonderful policies in place, if you don't have energy, you can't grow further than, or you can't grow faster than a particular speed. So, and I like the fact that there's sort of macroeconomic drivers being identified in terms of the provincial context, one of which is that we have a certain element of control, or not control, but ability to initiate. certainly via municipalities, and then a changed electricity regime is around that, and that helps to build call it the road that you can go fast on. So have you done any studies in terms of the potential impact of energy production or a reliable energy supply and a growth of it, and what impact it can have on the Western Cape? And then I think the other key point that I take out of this is, Chair, it's severely limited what the province can do apart from those two areas: municipal performance and also investment in education. It's also highly dependent on the budgeting process at a national level. Now, part of the problem, I'm not sure one can change it, I'm not sure whether it's even practical, but part of the problem is essentially it stops slicing. You know, there is an element of if you look at the process of budget setting, it certainly appears to me, and from what I understand, around those processes that, frankly, provinces in general, not just the Western Cape and municipalities, I'm not sure the process itself works from a service delivery point of view backwards. And I would just on that comment, would like to hear your inputs. Is there opportunities for a province to influence the budgeting cycle, the process of budgeting, more in favor of, call it the other way around, coal face up rather than parastatals you want to sustain, well, in my view, failed and expensive systems that are directly affecting the revenue that the province has available? Is there in a budgetary process better opportunities for provinces to influence it? Thanks.
Thank you for that. Member Masipa, can you go for us? Are you ready?
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, thanks once again to our presenter of today. Chair, I mean, we note obviously the economy is growing below inflation, which is a worry. Consumers are feeling the pinch in terms of, the money purchasing power is getting little and little, and especially the guys that are on grant, our residents are really feeling the pinch. Inflation targeting, obviously, as mentioned, reduce, and I think that will obviously also, reduce the wage or salaries bargaining power by unions and so forth. But what we are seeing is the opposite, is that the service costs and cost of goods are, mostly above 7% in terms of, increases, and medical aids being one example, water and sanitation and ESCOM electricity. Those are some of the examples. But, I was an economic scholar. I might really be not, as sharp as I used to be. But seeing the reduced interest rates obviously will have effect on return on investment. So, e.g., pensioners who are already, challenged with their pension, not having the purchasing power, and their pensions are not earning enough good returns, obviously because of the low interest rate when it becomes to be reduced. I think that's one element that I'm a little bit concerned about. And obviously, we are also getting there to become pensioners as well. So we got to also think about that. That being said, country's revenue collection isn't really great, and we know that we are not able to provide a full suite of services as a province. However, what we choose to do, be 10 or be 12 things that we choose to do, I think the province is doing them very well. But still leave a lot really to be desired in terms of really addressing the core, call it constitutional mandate of the province, like fighting crimes, ensuring that every household is food secured. We don't have a food insecurity in our country. Our problem is a food system. getting the food from, where they are produced to the level where they can be consumed. So, and our biggest challenge is health and education are obviously, those heavily affected in terms of really ensuring that the budget allocation is covering them. And again, security, police, and so forth. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that I think the choice that the province have made, I think, in my view, is that they have made those choices to make a better multiplier effect in terms of ensuring that we deal with the challenges that are stubborn, in other parts of the country and as well as here in the province. So now, really coming to my question, and our biggest challenge is finding a proper allocation, which is a problem, and crowding in donor investors. And I know that Jack Holland is doing something which is really trying to address the social development and so forth. How do you see the province making, even much better choices going forward? Or is BER, your economic research, happy with the choices that they have made? Are there additional choices that you think that the province need to make in order to really be able to provide, the services to our residents in terms of the needs? And also, maybe adding to that is, how would you advise this committee to conduct a proper oversight to ensure that we are able to account, one, to our voters on the job that we are doing, to ensure that, when we term comes to an end, we can really say, this is what this committee has done for you as the residents of the Western Cape. Looking at G4J strategy, and I think you mentioned it, is it strong enough to have the province to caution its citizens from potential future shocks? And if there are future shocks that you have identified as economic research, what are those future shocks, and how do you see the municipality, especially, being able to really deal with this? And obviously, maybe if you can answer it from a perspective that, we might not be having municipalities that are outright governed, especially in rural areas. Those coalitions, we know they have got really some challenges. How do you see, the municipalities and the provinces in terms of corporate governance, being ready to deal with those kind of shocks that you might, have identified? Chair, sorry, it's a bit long, but I hope my questions are captured properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Masipa. Over to you, Member Nkondlo, and then I think we've got Member Bryant after that, and then at that stage, that'll be the end of round one, and then we'll take some questions after Dr. Haverman has had a chance to respond. Member Nkondlo.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the colleagues. And let me thank BER for the presentation. Although I might have catched the presentation, at a time where I think most of the parts have been raised. But I'd like to check, I think on slide, I think it's 57, on my electronic copy, the one that speaks about the shift allocation towards provinces. And I think the graph there demonstrates, I think, how the split of the money between national department, provinces, and local government. And I want to check with the colleague, the BER, that with the tussle over the 30-year period, because as you would see that the percentage share between the three spheres have not necessarily been equitable. So when there is a battle about, the equitable share shifts in terms of formula itself, I am not sure what would be the conversation that is required to also bring in local government at this point. Because I think Salga had mentioned many a times with municipalities the issue of unfunded mandates. that municipalities at the end, because they are at the coal face of governance with the people, their particular expectations for municipalities. But you have a national and a province, which at most provincial sphere of government plays more, a project management, if I were to use that term loosely, because at times it will receive the money and then it would allocate with some functions to municipalities for the municipalities to implement. And we've seen where some of this model works and where in some areas it doesn't work. It creates a red tape. One area you would hear this, and you would hear this also from the private sector, is on the on housing provision or general developments, because you would understand that the municipalities will have a responsibility to do the whole notion of housing needs, register those, do the approve the building plans and all of these. And in that, from the developer's point of view or construction companies, is the entire red tape, of how the time that it will take for government to get to a point where the actual houses gets to be built and the contracting happens. And at times, private sector will say, sometimes we do have the money, as an example, as private sector, if government were to sort of unlock some of the regulatory functions, both at the level of the capacity of the municipality on the demands or the mandate of the municipality. And I'm using this function of housing provision as one aspect, but let alone others. For example, local economic development, which is managing those economic benefits of the big projects, be it CAPEX, industrial programs that are happening. For example, we talk of municipalities like Saldanha, where you've got the big ports there, the city of Cape Town and the likes, and there you've got communities having particular expectation because you've got these big industrial projects and complexes in those particular spaces. So I'm asking, with all of this, where do we place, the distributive sort of aspect of the budget allocation that takes into cognizance that local government is not a junior partner in the implementation of government policy, just from a budgeting point of view, but also from the capacity of the sophistication that is required. As an example, with the Committee of Economic Development, we would normally speak and talk to Westgro about building the capacity of municipalities, for them to be able to generate investment plans, because the point is projects are there at a municipal level, but municipalities do not have the necessary capacity, to put together an investment plan. And then Westgro actually had to take a duty of creating some kind of municipal engagement along that. And you see that if these municipalities had this capability, they would be able, to on their own, turn around, projects, very much quickly, so that they are able to then trigger local economic development and opportunities for their municipalities. Because when we do the municipal economic review outlook, we see there that you see this municipality having this particular potential. But when you look at the equality in the indices, be it the Human Development Index or the Gini coefficient, there is glaring a limitation when you look at the cost of living of the people, especially those that are poor, in those particular municipalities. So I think that this is an issue for me that I think is very important in how do we do the shifts in public financing and public budgeting, that also in the conversation with equitable share formula, that also take into cognizance, how the monies are allocated to include a local government. The second issue, I think, is around our growth for jobs. With the recent, with the global dynamics, particularly the tariffs. One of the things that was debated yesterday is actually the implication to the citrus industry. And the provincial minister, I think, was giving us great news of what has happened, in terms of some of the shifts to the other markets. But the issue that would always be raised, and it's in their annual report, that actually with what has happened to the US, and because the bigger sort of export market for our agricultural product would have been the US. So the shift may not necessarily happen speedily to markets, for example, as in Africa, because of some of the challenges of capacity, infrastructure, and others. Even going to other markets, whether in the East, there is that particular problem. The potential is there. For example, China would have said, we demand these, amounts of products, including agricultural products, but the logistical capacity, may not necessarily be able to match. So one of the concerns from where I'm sitting with what has been set as the target of the G4J is how realistic it is and the assumptions that have been made against the global shifts and the dynamics and instability that you see, that you would have expected to see a particular growth, which is something that we've seen with the national economy as an example, that there will be growth projections that you are unable to match because of some of the dynamics, both in the domestic economy, but also in the global economy that are beyond your control. So for me, I think this is one issue that I'm interested with a question by Honorable Masipa and our chairperson in the Committee of Economic Development. What role would we, because ours is oversight, ours is to always juxtapose what would have been the targeted growth projection, let's say annually, over that 2030 as an example target, but is to look at it every year. Are we shifting the needle against all of these so that we are not shocked, we don't come back and say, hey, we would have thought that we're going to gain this particular growth, but things are not happening. And please also speak about what actually I think it was either the Reserve Bank, if it is not the Minister of Finance, who spoke about the currency issues when it comes to the devaluing of the rand. Where are we, especially in the global trade, with that particular problem, and what can we actually expect if there's going to be any issue or any developments around it? So I think that would be also an issue that one is actually interested in, Chair, at this point. I think those two issues for now, for me, are issues that are important at how do we ensure against the global things, because there are job numbers, and this is one of the things that the province through G4J had said it's going to develop, is the number of jobs. And in the job numbers, my last issue, one of the things one is observing, or we are observing, is that as the growth in globally is happening, the income levels for labor is not necessarily growing. And this is a serious concern if we're to talk about inflation cost, affordability, and closing the inequality. So one of my challenges, especially when we talk about, growth for jobs, is also not looking at the quality of jobs. Because so long as people are earning very low wages, the consumption capacity that we are banking on to lift, the income into the economy is always going to be tinkering. So it's important for us to also consider what is happening in the labor markets, because as much as we were talking about what the Vision 260 is actually being achieved, and the Citrus Growers Association has confirmed that actually they are going to surpass the target. The question for one is, are we seeing in the labor market that those that are working in the farms, in the agri space, are going to be getting any benefits of increase in their incomes because also the economy, does depend on the increase in their incomes, which on the other side, are the consumption that is gonna be able to buy goods and services, so that we can see, some kind of a generation, of revenue on the other side. So maybe you can also speak about that, if there is evidence that is demonstrating otherwise. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo. Member Bryant.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll be quick. I know there's a lot of questions already been asked, and I think I've been covered by some of them. Just 2 points. The first one is I was quite interested in, just for clarity's sake, I'm not an economist myself. I've done 1 or 2 courses, but I'm certainly not an economist. But I was interested to hear the comments made around reducing interest rates and reducing inflation. Because I remember after the COVID-19 crisis, one of the measures that was put in place by many of the global federal institutions, finance institutions, was to raise interest rates as a way to drive down inflation. And that's what we were told for a long time, that was the way to deal with it. So perhaps there's a different approach, and it's interesting to hear that. So maybe if you could just expand on that a little bit. And then the second one is in terms of coalitions. It's great to hear that the GNU is being welcomed by business, but I did hear that there was a little bit of apprehension around some other coalitions at local government level. I just want to find out, is there some sort of a formula? I don't really want to use that word, but an approach that one can rely on when it comes to the impact of a coalition at a local government level on the economic outlook, as opposed to a single party of government. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Bryant. Dr. Haverman, I think I imagine it's a bit of a complex smorgasbord you've been given there to try and tackle for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I think starting with your question, I actually wanted to just put up, I didn't do all these slides, partly because we've got new numbers coming out soon, and these are quite old now. But the interesting thing, which I think you raised, is obviously that the Western Cape is doing relatively better than other provinces, and these are just some slides highlighting the fact that builders are more upbeat than their national counterparts, for example. Manufacturing confidence has been higher than in other parts of the country. Retail confidence has also exceeded national retail confidence. And vehicle sales have been faster in the Western Cape over the last 2 years. And I just want to put those up because, unfortunately, it's been quite, the GDP numbers from Stats SA come out quite slowly, and there's been also the census numbers. We have a lot of concerns about the census numbers. It's actually very difficult to work out exactly what's going on in the Western Cape economy from the data, but it does look like, I think, as you highlighted, the Western Cape is growing faster, and there has been obviously a significant shift of people to the province. So that I think is also in turn, as I said, actually put additional pressure on it. It seems to us that there has been a move from all provinces, and actually is a kind of across income groups, and it sort of has different effects on different municipalities depending on who moves across. Then to Honourable Walters' question about the energy component. Yes, one part of the highway is the cost of energy. Actually, I should ask the chair to talk about IPPs, because I think George was one of the leading, is probably, I think, going to be the leading one in this area. Interesting enough, from the research we did, and we've actually published a paper for Operation Bulella very recently, explaining why there have been delays, because at some stage there was an expectation that IPPs would be rolled out faster than they have been at the municipal level. But interestingly enough, it's more and more actually about the cost of electricity than the security of supply. So it seems as though municipalities are actually very worried about passing on these really high costs of electricity to their consumers, And if they implement renewable energy, for example, at a municipal level, then they won't have to put up costs so fast, because obviously solar power is a lot cheaper. But that has been a very important component of that. Then, municipal performance, I think mentioned, has been relatively good in the Western Cape in education. And then the question about the opportunity for the province to influence spending, I guess, from the coalface up, and it's similar to Honourable Nkodlo's question, but I'll deal with that separately. Is of course that we must always go back in history to remembering why parliaments exist. Actually, I think one of the reasons why parliaments were invented was for the king to be able to tax the citizenry, and parliaments are the mechanism by which one of the most important things that parliaments do is actually the budget. And so, how does one exercise that budget discipline? How does Parliament exercise its role in both the provincial parliament and the national parliament to ensure that we spend on the right things? So how do we push reducing spending, for example, on ineffective seaters? What is it that can be done either at the provincial parliament or at the national parliament? There is the mandating process. There are hearings that are held. Perhaps 10 years ago, that wasn't such an effective system, but changing politics has changed, I think, the dynamics between national and provinces quite significantly. And to what extent is this an opportunity also to drive more reform, or reduce spending, for example, on state-owned enterprises that perhaps are consuming a lot of money, because there is only so much money and you can redirect it in different ways. And I think the question about a budget is, how do you actually direct it in a better way? Honourable Masipa, yes, that is the consequence, obviously, of reduced interest rates, is that pensioners will receive less interest and income. You do hope that inflation has also come down. So what the total impact, obviously, on how much they will be spent. At one stage, inflation was, I think, 6%, and high inflation hurts the poor and those on pensions the most, because they don't have the ability to earn more money. They don't have unions or jobs where they get their salaries adjusted by inflation. So actually, overall, I think lower interest rates and lower inflation rate, although there'll be less money income earned at the same time, because inflation is lower, that is quite important. In terms of choices that the province has made, what better choices could be made? I fortunately no longer work for the province. It is the BR. We're not really a political entity, so I'm not going to comment too much on that, other than to say that, a very obvious point that this committee's role is very important in terms of oversight on the budget, and particularly right now, I think, on the other areas of potential income, like the gambling revenue, understanding better how things like motor vehicle license fees and other income sources could be used for the province, and actually just overall to what extent the money is going in the right ways. Having been in charge of the budget for a few years, it's obviously fantastic and brilliant, so you don't have to worry too much. Growth for jobs. Yes, I think one of the things about growth for jobs is to what extent does the province use education as a driver of growth? I think that is something to come out with. Then the question was on coalitions, municipalities. Is there like an optimal level of coalitions? I think the big point is that from all our surveys of business, they are very worried about uncertainty. And so obviously the more times coalitions change, the more uncertain policy can be. But what really matters is service delivery. So no matter what the coalition, is the coalition delivering on water, electricity, roads, etc. Seems to be what our surveys are saying. And then Honourable Nkondlo asked about the division of revenue, slide 57. I'm just going to put that up for the committee. Yeah, so this really is the and I think that, you know, my points that I made about cost-cutting exercise at national, like CETA reform and state-owned enterprises, service delivery, I think I completely agree with you, Honourable Nkondlo, is actually at the local government level. So, you know, if municipalities, and many municipalities do have unfunded mandates, they do end up doing things that they can't raise revenue for, including things like housing. And you try with the way the conditional grant system works to allocate money to housing, but if it's about moving around money, there is a question about to what extent can cutting spending at the national level on these very expensive programs and very expensive state enterprises, that will unlock money obviously for provinces and municipalities, and I think that would benefit service delivery over the long run. You know, there's a lot of work going on about municipal funding at the moment, and the Treasury is looking very closely at how that's allocated. But I think a lot can be done at the municipal level. A lot could be done to improve spending at the national level, which I think would be to the benefit of the province, of all other spheres of government. Yeah, so I think the point about the global shifts and consumption capacity to impact the economy. Yes, I mean, I think that there's been an interesting thing that's happening from a global shift perspective, is that more and more of our exports now are obviously directed to China and India, as those economies have grown very fast and have grown faster than the US and Europe. But from my understanding, the growth for jobs, it's not really about a specific market, but actually markets generally. So, you know, if you want ports to work, it won't really matter where the exports grow, it'll go somewhere. And so I think the growth for job strategy is correct in just trying to increase growth generally, and to use what the province has to grow. You know, increasingly tourism is untapped markets for tourism are the Chinese market and the Indian market, and I think we shouldn't always be hyper focused on the US and European markets for both our goods and for almost everything else. And then Honourable Bryant asked about raising interest rates. Yes, so what happened after COVID is there was a huge increase in inflation. Most of it actually in the US and the UK, inflation actually went to over nearly 9-10%. In the UK, we were very fortunate. We didn't have such a big increase in inflation, but the central banks all had to raise interest rates to make sure that inflation was only temporary. One of the words that was going around was something called that inflation would be very temporary and would come down again. It has done so, but that's also, I think, partly because central banks did raise rates quite aggressively when inflation arose, and now they have the scope to reduce rates again because inflation has softly come down. And then I think on your question about coalitions, I think that's more political territory. I would wish that for those political coalition questions, I wish my political analyst was really working for us and she could answer all of that, because politics is not really my strong point. So thank you, Mashu.
Thank you for that. Looking for some further questions and further comments. Member Walters, Member Boyson. Okay, you two can go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, I'm sorry, is it the next speaker? Yeah, I'm not sure the coalition question was a fair one. I think that's something we need to work on. But Chair, just in terms of also both as an efficiency driver and as a potential job creator, did you do any studies or projections, particularly in the Western Cape, around AI, connectivity, the fourth industrial revolution? To what extent it's one of the call it pillars of the approach that's been taken, certainly by the Premier and the department there. And it would be interesting to see whether it's possible to estimate or project any potential job, more efficient government, how it translates into more jobs for people. I think Member Nkondlo made a very good point. It's not much as job creation is important. I don't think we must ever negate that or in any way try to prevaricate around that. The ideal is stable, permanent jobs that people can build a future, and that's ultimately what we're all after. I'm saying that so that you know where I'm going with this question. But have you done any projections on the impact of AI and connectivity on job creation, particularly in the Western Cape? Are there any projections? Is there any empirical data that will certainly help in my other committee? Thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'm not a fund in this field, but I've been part of engagements where these kind of topics come up, like this session. There's a belief that the period that you're referring to, where we had a 6% economic growth, etc., there's a political belief in some quarters that it was not an ideal growth because it did not create jobs. It was based on increased company tax. And now my question based on that is that a true reflection when one looks back? And then also, Chairperson, there's also the belief that we are not doing ourselves a favor as the country when it comes to the materials that we have, the raw materials, etc. And the belief is we are not beneficiating enough. And the belief is if we beneficiate, that would create more jobs and that would actually grow the economy to an extent as well. And that was linked to the belief that Trump in his first term, he was seen as a friend of business, precisely because there's a belief that he created a circular economy, that what is in America get used in America, get circulated in America, and whoever has an interest adds to the value of the American products. And apparently, again, we're lacking on that as a country, your opinion on that. And then I agree with you when you say that education matters. So it might be a political controversial topic because for political reasons, there's a measure there that the more uneducated, the more easy it is to manipulate people to do certain things in a certain manner. But that is not your strong point, but I believe it is true. I experience it to some extent. And then the gambling you referred to, online gambling, there is a debate at the moment where online gambling, the taxes should go to where people are gambling instead of going to national. I don't know how that would be monitored, etc., but there is that belief that where you gamble, the taxes should go to that province. And that reminds me on your point where you've said that the tariffs or whatever's being charged, the taxes should be the same in all provinces. I remember some years ago in the trucking business, we found that because I worked for a trucking company, my boss registered his trucks in Mpumalanga instead of the province where he was residing in. So maybe that is probably what you're relating to. People would move to where it is cheaper when there's a cheaper tax or tariff. And then also at local government level, and Chairperson, this is what I found in the business which we're coming from, is that you would find that big businesses are willing to pay value for money, but they're not going to pay if the systems aren't talking to each other. Example of that, and Member Walters raised the issue of planning. That you'll find in the planning department, businesses expand. The plans get approved, but those expansions does not get communicated to the billing department. So the billing is wrong and the business can afford to pay, but local government is not getting what's due to them because the systems aren't talking to each other. It is done in planning, but it's not done in finance. So I do think that we need to reach a stage where systems need to be integrated. For whatever happens, then there's synergy when it comes to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Boyson. Yes, I think there are a couple of colleagues on the online platform. I'll give you an opportunity now. I think if we go to slide 34, which is Operation Vulindlela, and the various projects that are being undertaken there. And I think, if one looks also at Business Leadership South Africa's reform tracker, which indicates very much the type of streams that are being looked at and those projects to get them implemented. But I think, as has been pointed out here on 34, that those projects that are listed there, which includes this aspect of strengthening local government and improving delivery of basic services, these are all key, to me, they are all key issues that seem to be impacting all of us. And I suppose if there are any thoughts that you have there on what some of those more specific areas perhaps can be accentuated a lot more from a provincial level to try and get that leverage. Then I see Member Masipa has indicated that some of the questions that he asked perhaps were not answered, and I think if you can just ask them more specifically there, please, Member. And then I see Member Nkondlo's also, you've got your hand up. Thanks. And also just noting that I believe that tea time is approaching as well.
Close it up.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Chair, thank you very much. I just want to go back maybe to my questions. And I want to believe that political choices that we make, they inform economic analysis or economic reports. So hence my questions. The Western Cape government has made a choice. That strategic choice is G4J strategy. And that was the basis of my question. So I don't think that question was answered. And I think I was looking at the multiplier effect of that strategic choice in addressing the stubborn challenges that you are sitting with. Whether the Economic Bureau of Stellenbosch has been able to analyze it a little bit deeper to understand if or to advise if this strategy really is good for the province. But maybe the question, if I have to rephrase it, Chair, has the Economic Bureau really done a deep dive of looking at the Western Cape economic structure in terms of really being able to caution itself against any other shocks that might happen? And I also wanted to hear what are the potential shocks that obviously, if and when you did those analysis. And the last point that I made was the question about the ability to attract investors, especially for, call it, non areas that are challenged with attracting investments. For example, the Central Karoo, they don't have the rating to go and be able to borrow money on the market like the city of Cape Town will do. They don't have the investor rating as such. So I think the question was really around how do you think this strategy or this municipality can help themselves in terms of choices, but also in terms of the strategic choice that we have made. Are these strategic choices able to really sustain and support this kind of economies of the municipalities as such? I hope I'm clear, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Member Masipa. I hope Dr. Haberman has got the gist of your questions there. Member Nkondlo?
No, thank you, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to check, I think, as a follow-up, because I think if there is an agreement on the diversification of trade and looking at new markets, my question was around the agility, of our domestic market and export capacity, to move swiftly to meet the demand and the growing demand in the new markets that South Africa has not been sort of focusing on for some time now, because time is everything. And I think that for me is what also contributes to these growth projections that we're talking about, because if we're not factoring those, we create, unrealistic expectation of the growth of our provincial, including our national economies. So one would be interested in both the Operation Vulindlela and also the G4J, in those assumptions made for, the growth for the South African economy, to check whether are we industrializing at a pace requisite and to meet the opportunities that are there in these new markets. And I know, as an example, that the minister again would have raised the work that has been done with the port around logistics to contribute to the very problem of the speed at which goods are able to move, with speed from our ports right into their destinations. So that's one thing that we have been told a lot about, and there's been a focus, including getting private sector into those spaces. But one is always not hearing the extent to which, we are industrializing and producing, the domestic capacity and industrial capacity, within the country. As an example, I mean, we've got in the presidency that presidential infrastructure, I think, not sure it's a commission or what. And one of the things that was being spoken about is a target that they have around, the gross fixed capital formation that has actually been stagnant to negative over the past years. So I'm not sure what one could be able to look at or to see in the Operation Vulindlela, in the G4J, that actually matches up, that target of looking at whether are we increasing our growth fixed capital formation as one aspect. But secondly, are we seeing new businesses? Because one of the things we've also been not performing well as a country, even in global standards, is on new businesses. That is, our SMME growth is actually not showing that, we are having an uptake with all of these great opportunities. We are left with a big few corporate businesses that are there at the apex, which sometimes are unable to absorb, all the other, economic demands in our country, let alone the informal economy, where there isn't that much work that is being done, let alone research to actually help us quantify what is happening in those spaces. So my interest, I think, is around at the speed where you have opportunities that are sitting there and you can quantify them in terms of the quantums of goods that are, can be purchased from the South African market, but you do not necessarily have, sufficient enterprises. You don't necessarily see the investment, that is being done. Some of the funds are sitting in financial institutions and are not reinvested, for these fixed infrastructure that we need in the country. So for me, this is the question that I'm asking. If I were to read the objectives in the Operation Vulindlela, what is it as a committee, once again, from a budgeting, but also from an economic development? What are these things that we must be able to look at, including, in the G4J to help navigate? Because we need, that is why I'm asking, are we industrializing? Are we having the plans? And are we answering that in both the Operation Vulindlela and the Growth for Jobs, building, new capabilities, new businesses that we can be assured that they are going to absorb, employment, and they're going to create, employers themselves for the domestic economy and the growth of the province and of the national economy. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Mkonda. I think I'm going to hand over to you now, Dr. Haverman, and then I think we can perhaps break for tea at that stage, and then we'll see. We'll come back from tea and see to what extent we can wrap up at that stage. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think so probably just not covering the questions about the choices that the province has made. No, I do think that the G4J strategy is the correct strategy in terms of driving growth. I mean, it's interesting if you look at other provinces, growth is not always seen as the key lever of what needs to be done. I think Growth for Jobs goes a long way in terms of dealing with that. And I think the strategic choices, particularly around, ensuring the particularly, I think the key areas of driving growth opportunities through investment, the idea of energy resilience, and I think a lot of work has been done at the provincial level to support municipalities to move to energy resilience. I feel a bit like I'm also reviewing my own homework because I was in the provincial treasury when Growth for Jobs was launched. So I feel like I might be reviewing my own work. I think all the things are obviously correct, particularly around essentially making the economy resilient to things like energy and water, and then stimulating market growth through exports and economic growth, which I think goes to the question from Member Nkondlo is, are we able and are we doing the right things to make sure that our exporters are agile and are able to, at a very agile level, reorient their growth towards new markets? But I think that really goes to the heart of what I think, and I'm now combining questions a little bit, but I'm happy to come back on these. Is that it's very important to do things that are almost that don't benefit one particular sector or one particular area or one particular industry too much, because you never know what can happen in the future. We would never, for example, have been able to predict that cell phones would take over the world. At one stage, we had something called Telkom, and we had fixed lines, and the idea was that we should support Telkom in its journey to be a better state-owned enterprise. It was a very long time ago. I'm maybe now giving away my age. And it had this very small little unit in it called Vodacom. And now, of course, Vodacom is substantially bigger than the old Telkom. That was never part of the government's industrial strategy. But what can government do? Well, government can make sure that whoever is successful can be successful. And you do that by making sure that the things that are available to all companies are cheaper and better, and you kind of let the economy grow by itself. So you kind of just get out of the way, I think, is a really good way of thinking about it. And that goes to the point, I think, of what Operation Vulindlela is trying to achieve, and what I think the Growth for Jobs strategy is trying to achieve, is if the ports aren't working, then the government should make the ports work. If there's no electricity, then government should make electricity work, because then we can let the economy grow by itself, and it can then take off and start growing much quicker. And it's a slightly different way of thinking about how you achieve economic growth, to this idea of trying to champion specific industries over other areas, if that makes any sense. And I think it also goes to the beneficiation question. I mean, the interesting thing, a lot of people have been saying beneficiation is the way forward. I once had an interesting example of, should a cattle farmer develop a leather goods factory on his farm? It's a kind of an extreme example. But if you particularly growing good in cattle, should you at the same time also build a leather tanning hide thing and a shoe factory on your farm? And if you ask the average farmer, they'll probably say, listen, I'm looking after my cows. If you were to ask a shoe factory, do you want to keep cows in the factory so that the cow's hide is close to the shoes, they'll probably say, are you crazy? And it goes into, you can also use historical examples, and it's all very interesting about global supply chains. So often the shoe manufacturers are actually very close to the people that are buying the shoes, because they have to, in the old days, used to do cobbling or whatever. Often, but that's not where the best place is to raise cows, because by definition, cows need lots of space. And that kind of goes to this point of diversification. An interesting thing that's really come out of Harvard Growth Lab's work on this idea is that actually what you should start doing is looking at related products. So you should try and develop products that are related to what you're good at. So in South Africa, we're very good at mining, and we've actually developed quite a good, very good at mining machinery. Because it's very difficult to do deep mining, we've developed a really strong capability in mining engineering. That's kind of beneficiation because it's additional value added, but it's not the beneficiation we often talk about, which is that we should become, we should be making gold jewelry. But it's a different type of beneficiation. It's actually, I would argue, it should be something called horizontal diversification, not vertical diversification. Then there have been a lot of points made. There was a point also raised about, fortunately, I have all my slides on my laptop, so I'm going to quickly go to that. The first one is on, sorry, I didn't put these slides into this presentation, but I should have, just on our work on the Western Cape overall. Yes, we do follow the Western Cape quite relatively closely, partly because we are in the Western Cape, so we're very interested in it. And it's sort of its structure. It is quite a large component, 14.3% of the total South African economy. Interesting enough, it's smaller than Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, which is actually really interesting, particularly that it's still smaller than KZN. I was recently up in KZN, and I'm always struck by that it's actually a remarkably big province. But that doesn't mean that it can't become bigger. In actual fact, it has been growing. Between 2019 and 2023, it was actually the fastest growing province. And it grew by 2% on average. It has been growing slightly faster than the national average. And then, of course, the unemployment rate in the Western Cape is lower than the other provinces in the national average, the lowest in South Africa. And I think that goes to the fact that the province is actually quite good at particular industries that are actually quite job absorbing, particularly agriculture. So yeah, we do quite a lot of analysis. Although I must say the Pero is also very good at doing analysis of the Western Cape. Actually, while I've got, so when you ask, you must be always careful, Chair, when you ask questions. An economist will always find a slide. So I have another slide while I'm showing slides. So let me just find that one. I think I might have, yeah, here we go. Which is just this question about the relationship between, oh, sorry, my laptop has died. The relationship between growth and job creation, and that is very much that growth over the long period of time, but particularly in the 2000s, actually, as I said in my other slides, growth was initially quite slow. I'm sorry, employment growth was initially quite slow from 1994 onwards as the economy integrated into the rest of the world. But as the overall economy started to grow, we actually saw job creation take off quite significantly. So we have seen job creation from growth. Our estimates are actually that over the long run, a 1 percentage point increase in growth leads to about a 0.7 percentage point increase in jobs. And so actually the most significant and consistent way of growing jobs over the long run is obviously economic growth. Then to I think I've hopefully covered the agreement on the direction of trade and agility of our domestic market and export capacity move swiftly. What you really need to do, as I said, make sure that you get the constraints to growth lifted for everybody, so that if they are able to be agile, that they can move into those areas. Then Honourable Walters asked the question about AI and growth. I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think the problem is that AI might not be good for job creation in some sectors. I worry for myself because a lot of what AI does is actually kind of what we do, which is prepare research reports, and AI makes it a lot easier. AI leads to a lot of automation in various things. So I guess the question for the province is, so what do you do? Do you try and be North Korea and close the borders and hope that, if we don't give anyone internet, then AI won't be a thing for us? I don't think that's the right strategy. I think that you have to hope that in the long run, developing, improving connectivity and improving internet connection will actually, because that's the way the world's going. You have to kind of lean into that process. I'm quite passionate about some of the ideas that the provincial government has had for improving the use of AI in government. There's certainly lots of opportunities for improving service delivery, using AI to understand, to help in service delivery, particularly in health and education. So the education department here has done quite a lot of really good work about thinking about e-learning and e-classrooms and bringing technology into learning. And the health department has also done a lot of thinking about how to use data and AI in improving the world for patients. And then, your question on slide 34 about strengthening local government, which is a big operation in the Vulindlela area. I'm really pleased that they put that on the agenda, because I think that from a growth perspective, Operation Vulindlela, from a growth perspective, municipalities are really actually where businesses suffer their largest consequences, and where, if you can't get water or electricity, then how are you going to run a business? They have got I think, a very good set of suggestions. But it's not impossible, actually, Chair, for this committee to even invite the Operation Vulindlela team to come and present and to engage at the provincial level, particularly now that the reforms are actually taking place in a more provincial, are now touching areas that are more of a provincial competence, particularly because municipal oversight is a provincial competence. It's concurrent with the province's lead on much of it through the provincial treasuries, obviously, MFMA team and the Department of Local Government's COGTA team. And a lot of the reforms are going to affect the role of the province in that, and obviously affect a lot of the municipalities in the province. So I don't know if you've had a presentation from Operation Vulindlela. It might be quite an interesting thing, actually, particularly focusing on the municipal area. I think they would be open to coming and presenting, and actually maybe a good opportunity to discuss some of the areas. I'm sure, Chair, you would be able to offer a lot of advice to the Operation Vulindlela team on this area. Yeah, I think a lot of points about. Yeah, I think I completely agree about you're right about the if you make things, if you reduce the taxes, for example, on trucks, but the same thing happens with motor vehicle license fees, where if you get a hire car, it's always an Eastern Cape car because the Eastern Cape has got lower motor vehicle license fees. So what the car hire companies do is they simply register all their cars in the Eastern Cape. And that saves them quite a lot of money. And so the same thing happens to gambling, and it's quite difficult. So I completely agree that it's quite difficult then to create a system. It might be that you create a minimum tax. The National Treasury's proposal doesn't quite say that, but maybe that's one thing to talk to them about is do we create a minimum gambling tax across the economy that affects everybody? And I think one of the good things that comes out of their proposal is maybe something along those lines. Because there is actually a natural race to the bottom to make it easier to get licenses, particularly online licenses. So, we were always worried in the Western Cape that if you don't register an online gambling or sports betting company, then they're simply going to go and register in another province. And that's I think the Western Cape Gambling Board has been very good. But we see the Mpumalanga Gambling Board has actually done a lot of registrations and has collected a lot of revenue as a result. And so there needs to be, I think, much more national coordination. And I think there's a stronger role at a national level because you can't expect the provinces to sort of take responsibility for these things. And then I know I'm cutting into tea, Chair. Hopefully I've covered all the questions. Did I miss anything specific? I'm just seeing all my notes. Any specific questions? I'm happy to.
I think you've covered a fair number there. I think we'll break for tea, coffee now, and then just give members an opportunity now to, if they gain inspiration from their next cup of coffee, on the last round of questions, and then we can wrap up. Because I think it's Black Friday, and I think the members of the committee probably also want to participate in Black Friday. But let us break now. I think if we get back at 11:35, that gives us about 20 minutes. So we'll see you back at 11:35, committee.
If I could just plug my laptop in. Oh, thanks.
and I hope everyone had a good cup of tea and coffee and have sort of finalized your list for the Black Friday specials. So I think if we, just from a perspective of any further questions or interaction that we would like to have with Dr. Haberman, I'm just would like to see if there are any indications there. If we do not have, then we can release him, and then we can just wrap up our last little matters on committee proceedings. Just checking to see if there are any hands on the online platform. It doesn't look like, and within the chamber, are we fine? Okay, I think we then want to thank you very much for your presentation that you brought to us. And I think one of our efforts as a budget committee is in this environment that we are, which is, I think, a very exciting environment that we're living in within the country, in having a look at how the economy can be reshaped and how we can restore economic growth, how we can get ourselves back onto an employment path. It is very important for us, particularly in the Western Cape, to try and see how we can go about it, and obviously with the same importance for the country as such. And therefore, your insight and the thoughts that you put forward to us are certainly very valuable, and no doubt will stimulate some both thought, discussion, and hopefully help us chart a way in which we can reprioritize, if that is possible, our expenditure streams and where we can find additional revenue streams as such. I think that ultimately is really the objective that we have this discussion. And I think now I go back to my days as a councillor and as mayor, and the number of challenges that one does face, and having to look at how do you reconfigure that 100 Rand note to be able to get the type of value that you want to get out of it. And I think it's a very important debate for the country. And thank you very much for the work that you are doing at Mpumelelo as well, and in stimulating that whole debate in what we have seen. So thank you very much for being with us today and for the presentation that you have given us. And no doubt we will deliberate on that within Budget Committee, possibly not today, but in the next few meetings that we have as we embark on the whole process of dealing with the Adjustment Appropriation Bill and the DORA and going through to the main budget. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really, it's nice being back here, I guess. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Yeah, so Dr. Haberman can leave and we'll just give him a few moments there. And then I think just as a committee, we just need to look at a few of our matters. We have requested the WCPP's research unit also to compile a report for us on what they managed to glean from departmental budgets on the needs and the priorities of the various departments that would then be of assistance to us as a committee. That report we'd hoped would be available to us before today's meeting, but as of yesterday afternoon, the indications were and are that we'll only receive that report later today. So that report will then be circulated And I think what each of us on the committee, I think, needs to digest the presentation that Dr. Haberman at the BER has given us and use that in the mix of documents and reports that we received, including the briefing that we received from the FFC a couple of months ago. And we will also, procedural officer will also be circulating the documentation that has been made available in the MTBPS process that has gone from the speech by the minister through to the NT's presentation, the FFC's presentation to the NA and the NCOP, and that form of documentation for committee members to peruse. And hopefully that as a committee, we can come up with certain suggestions, recommendations, and proposals that we can perhaps put forward into the greater budget process for the Western Cape. Next week, on Thursday, we start our adjustment appropriation process after the speech in the chamber. And then on Friday, we have managed to secure 2 sessions for Budget Committee. And it's also been impacted by the timing available by the presenters. So we will receive, I think at 1 o'clock, we will have a meeting where the NCOP will present to our committee. And then again, from 4 till 6, National Treasury will be making a presentation to us. And I think both of those meetings are going to be online, virtual meetings. And in the week thereafter, we will then continue with our role in the process ultimately to make recommendations on the adjustment appropriation bill process. I don't know if there are any questions in that relation, and any comments that anyone may have. If not, I think if that is fine, then as I've indicated, I think we can adjourn our meeting and continue our business for the Friday and for the weekend ahead. Thank you very much for being with us. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.